Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Spooney Scrapbook. I'm Mike Kenichi. He's John Sponheimer. And today I'm really excited because it's Thanksgiving week. And if you know anything about Ansonia football, you know they've had a storied rivalry on Thanksgiving with the Naugatuck Greyhounds. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to go over some great Thanksgiving games. It'll be a lot of fun. And, Coach, as always, thank you for coming on today.
Mike, it's always great to be here, especially right before Thanksgiving, which is such an important holiday, but also such an important high school football day in Ansonia.
Right. Coach, before we talk about Naugatuck and Ansonia, I wanted to ask you, I apologize, I can't recall it, but when you played high school football, did Notre Dame and Hamden play on Thanksgiving back then, or?
Yes, they did. And it's been always called the Green Bowl even since then. I played in 62, 63, 64, and I believe the Green Bowl rivalry started maybe in 51 or 52, and it's gone consecutively since then between Hamden and Notre Dame.
Oh, so in a lot of ways, Coach, you were part of that rivalry when it was in the early stages. But let me ask you, just as a young kid and being able to play in that Thanksgiving game, what was that like for you? I mean, I always say that when you get to play in a Thanksgiving game, no matter who it is, it's always something that you'll remember forever.
It really was such an important time of our life, especially because you always look forward to the Green Bowl. The winner of the game would wear green the next year. Um, and 63 was even more of a poignant game when I was a junior because that was just 5 days after President Kennedy was assassinated. And we did play that day, and there was still an aura of the assassination hanging over everyone's head in it. But it's still, we went out and played, and then the next year on Thanksgiving Day, I only played half the game because I ended up getting a concussion, and I
Oh,
was taken to St. Raphael's Hospital, and I got out Saturday afternoon from the hospital. But I played half the game. But the nice thing about the 3 years that I played at Notre Dame, and I didn't play at all in my sophomore year when they were very good. That's when they were playing for number one in the state. But we won all three games in the rivalry during those 3 years.
yeah, and I always say this: you either want to win all three, or you want to be up 2-1. It's or you win your senior year, but those are the only three options. If you lose one, or if you lose all three, it really stings. And then if you it's you're down two or whatever, it's never fun. So the fact that you won all three, I mean, that had to be something. Because I would say they were probably your big rival back then, correct?
West Haven and Hamden, but especially
Yeah.
Hamden, last game of the year. There were no playoffs in high school football then, so that was probably the biggest rival of the year.
Right. So, real quick, before we get into Naugatuck and Ansonia, this, of course, was your first year not being a freshman coach, and I can never think of a time where Coach Sponheimer wasn't Ansonia's freshman football coach. Let me ask you, did it feel a little weird to you this year?
It did. I mean, I'm still involved in the same way with the varsity that I've always been involved, but not actually doing the freshman on a daily basis was a little strange. But Kevin Riley enjoyed watching Kevin Riley with his staff do a tremendous job. They went undefeated, I believe, with one tie. And unfortunately for high school freshman football the last few years, it's not just a pure freshman schedule, which we did for so many years. It was great. You play 8, 9, 10 games of freshman football, and you get to really see and get an idea what other schools had in freshman classes. But the last couple of years, we played 3, maybe 4 pure freshman games, and the rest have been sub-varsity, Froshmore games, etc. I mean, it's still excellent football for the kids to play, but it's not quite just working at was a freshman team all the time, which was something I really enjoyed.
Right. So, Coach, let me ask you. We're going to get, like I said, we're going to go over certain games, but the last 3 years, this rivalry has really kind of picked up again. I mean, Naughty won in 21, you guys won in 22, and then, of course, Naugatuck won in 23. So I always say this, that whenever both teams are really good, it just adds so much juice to the rivalry and it makes it so much more fun, especially for the fans and like fans who don't have a rooting interest in either team and they just want to see a good Thanksgiving game. I really believe that when both teams are at their best, that really makes that rivalry special.
It really does make it so much for the fans and even the players because we've had some years where we had a pretty good thought that we would, as long as we played our regular game, we would win the game. But in the last couple of years, with Coach Anderson and his staff at Naugatuck, they've done an excellent job. We've been in some real struggles, and we expect the same kind of tough right down to the end game this time. So it's we've been very fortunate over the many decades of the success we've had, but we fully expect this game to be a struggle.
Right. So, Coach, I'm not going to go in any particular order, but I'm going to start. I always love the overtime games between Ansonia and Naugatuck. Even Shelton and Derby had some great overtime games. So I want to start in the year 2000 because this was a double overtime in which you guys came out on top 15-12. So just talk about that Thanksgiving game in 2000.
We were behind in that game. Andre Tinney broke a big run for us in the fourth quarter. We battled back. We had Kenny Kinney when he was a freshman and made an interception in one of the overtime periods. We It was really a back and forth game, and we were very fortunate that we were able to get a winning field goal from Craig Bahoon. It was, I believe, it's the only time we've ever won a Naugatuck game on a field goal in that way. But it was very rewarding to say the least.
And if I remember correctly, Coach, you guys had just come into that game with a loss to Seymour, correct? So, I mean, going into that Thanksgiving game, I mean, the kids were kind of down over that loss to Seymour. And that's the one thing about Ansonia that I've always, thought was remarkable is they know how to bounce back from a tough loss like that because sometimes it's not easy when you lose an emotional game like that to come back and try to get back on your feet and win again.
You're right about that. It was a tough loss to Seymour that year, and we were still hoping to get into the playoffs. And we were able. Had we not won, we would not have gotten into the playoffs. So we had everything to play for, and it certainly meant an awful lot to win that game.
Right. So another game, Coach, that stands out to me was, of course, 1990. And what was interesting about that game, Coach, is so much was on the line. Number one, I think Naugatuck came into that game number 2 in the state. I think St. Joe's was number 1 in the state. And Derby really needed Ansonia to knock off Naugatuck to have any hopes to possibly finish number 1 in the state. So it's not every day you see Derby rooting for Ansonia. But also, this was the NBL championship on the line, and a lot of people favored Naugatuck. They thought Naugatuck was going to win that game, and you guys came out there. I believe you won 20-14. I think at Nolan Field. So talk about that game a little bit because I know that was one of Jack Hunt's favorite victories.
Naugatuck had been really thought of to be the best team in the NVL all year long. We saw them maybe 5 or 6 times. They were big. They were bigger than we were. They were a veteran team. They really thought they were going to make a run for the state championship, and rightfully so. They had a lot of weapons. Kid named Murphy was a very good quarterback. They had 3 running backs. They had real nice size. They had 2 big ends. So we were we were coming off the Derby loss, which was a very difficult loss in the middle of the season, and we had to bounce back from that, and we did, and we had a couple of setbacks, but we really rallied, and that game went back and forth. Kevin Sharkey made some great runs in that game for us. We played great defense, um, and we had gone up. We were up 2 touchdowns. We were up a touchdown. Hold. They were driving. We stopped them with about 2 minutes to go, and then we broke about a 60-yard run down to the 5 or 10 yard line, and then we went in for the score. I think Dennis Tinney might have gone in for the score. We were up 2 touchdowns, and we thought we might have been in good shape. All of a sudden, Naugatuck came down in about 4 plays. They threw about a 50 yard touchdown pass and scored to make it 20-14. and they were onside kicking, and fortunately we caught the onside or picked it up anyway. Jeff Press was a young sophomore player and recovered it, and we went on to win. And that Naugatuck team was probably as good as any team in the state, at least physically. I mean, I talked to a couple of teams they scrimmaged earlier, and they said that was by far the most physical Naugatuck team that they had ever seen for 20, 30 years. And and obviously it was a great. It really helped Derby a lot, and everything broke well for Derby that day. And if we couldn't be number one in the state, it was nice. It was nice for Derby, and because West Haven also upset St. Joe's, and then as you know on Championship Saturday, Danbury got beat by Greenwich. I think it was Greenwich that night. So Derby ended up number one, and our hats were off to them.
Yeah, and that was one of the best. You talked about Kevin. Kevin was just such a amazing player for you guys, 3-year starter, and he always seemed to rise to the occasion in the biggest of games. And I mean, you talk about a person you could really be happy for. I mean, Kevin always conducted himself like what a true captain and leader should be.
He was very unselfish, even though he's going to carry the ball most of the time. If all of a sudden the holes were going to open the other way because he would have to block, he would block 5 times in a row if he had to. It was great to coach Kevin Sharkey at Ansonia High School.
Right. Now, sometimes, Coach, unfortunately, you're on the losing end of games. And one that was really probably a heartbreaker, I'm sure, was 1982, 7-6. Naugatuck came out on top. But it was a classic game. They still talk about it to this day. So just talk a little bit about that game as well.
That was a game which went back and forth. I mean, back and forth, and then no one was scoring. Finally, Earl Stanley broke about a 40-yard touchdown run with 2 minutes to go in the game. We went ahead 6-0. And on the ensuing extra point, there was a mix-up. We tried to throw a pass out, not trying to throw the pass as a pass play. We were kicking the extra point, but it didn't work out. We threw a pass on a scramble to try and still salvage the extra point, and we weren't able to complete it. There was 1 minute and 54 seconds ago, I believe. We kicked off to Naugatuck, and we had probably only given up 1 or 2 touchdowns all year long with that varsity football team, and they started there was a penalty on the extra. It was a We kicked off and they got the ball at the 20-yard line, and they started to drive, and there was one tip ball which went off our defender's hands and was caught by their receiver. There was another roughing the passer penalty which gave another first down. Like a long story short, they ran a couple of good plays, and with I believe 16 seconds to go, they threw about a 15-yard slant pattern between a couple of our defensive backs and the ball. There was a picture in the paper. I mean, it was a fantastic throw and catch. The ball was actually almost touching one of the defensive backs' hands as it's going into the hands of the Naugatuck receiver. They caught it. They made the extra point. We had a chance. We tried to run the kickoff back and lateral once or twice, but that was it. And all of a sudden, we were staring at a 7-6 defeat.
Yeah. And I mean, it's really a shame because nobody deserved to lose that game. Both teams really played hard. But that's, sometimes how football is. But another game, Coach, and obviously I wasn't around for it, but they talk about it a lot. And I think it was probably your third year of coaching was 1974 when you guys came out on top 10-6. So talk about that game because everybody I've ever talked to said that was one of the great Thanksgiving games as well.
Well, that was a real battle defensively.
Nope, I lost him for a sec. We should get him back any minute. Sometimes we get a little technical difficulties when you're doing this, but I do expect him to get back on any second. Definitely do. So we'll just wait for Coach Sponheimer. But it's always fun talking about this stuff because when you're able to talk about this, it's just so much fun. He has as good of memory as anybody I've ever seen. And it's always a great thing to talk to him, and especially these Thanksgiving games. And I'm sure Coach will be back on in a sec. Sometimes, like I said, this is just what happens. We lose, for whatever reason. You know, the signal goes out, and it's the world of technology. So many things are good about technology, but there are things sometimes that are difficult. But I expect Coach to be back on, and he'll talk about 1974, which again, I wasn't around for, but everybody I've heard has said it's just a great, great game that was played that day. Uh, I believe it was played at Nolan Field, and Ansonia won. And this is really a good rivalry. And with Derby and Shelton not playing anymore, this is really, in my opinion, the biggest rivalry that we have in Thanksgiving right now. And some may disagree, but I really believe that these two teams have such a rich tradition of Thanksgiving that when they play each other, it's always very special because there's a okay, and we have them back. Yeah, we lost you for a sec, Coach, but we do have you back. Yeah,
I don't know if that's because I'm doing this on my phone, Mike, and my someone happened to call my I didn't answer the call, but maybe that disconnected it.
yeah, that's probably sometimes that will happen. But no worries. So you were talking about 1974. It was the 10-6 game.
Yeah, yeah, it was back and forth as far as again neither team was scoring anything at all. We did kick a field goal, which was highly unusual at that time. It may have been our only field goal of the year. We also scored on a play action pass to Freddie Duncan right from about the 8-yard line. We faked an off tackle run, or up to actually it was up the middle run. It was a lead up the middle, and he snuck in behind the safety. And we were able to get him the ball. Jimmy McGarry threw him the touchdown pass. But we had some great defensive players on that team. We had Joe Zero, we had Billy Chaplik, we had the Henry brothers, we had Jimmy Dempsey. We that that team was probably as tough a pure defensive team as we had, and we weren't quite as strong offensively at the end of the year. We still had a very good sophomore running back in Howie Tinney, but Terry Golston, who was our number one running back, suffered a fractured ankle against Hamden halfway through the season, and so we were just not quite as proficient offensively as we had been earlier in the year. But it was a great defensive struggle, and we came out on top.
Yeah, like I said, so many people I've talked to, whether I've talked to my uncle Ed, Morse, whoever it might be, they really talk about that game. Two games in the 70s, Coach, and they were back-to-back years, and they were real good games. Was, of course, 1978 when you guys won 14-7, and then I believe 1979 when you won 21-14. So just talk about those two games because that was as good of that's where the rivalry was just, one of the best in the state.
Well, in '78, that was the Olszewski team, and we had beaten Naugatuck. We had beaten Naugatuck every year since '73 at the time, and they had a very strong team. They had one loss, I believe, and we sort of bogged down a little bit. We got down near their goal line and didn't score, and they went down and they scored, and we had to come from behind. We were we were down. I think we might have been down 7-6, if I remember. I'm not 100% sure of the exact score, but I know we were down, and as we were driving, we sort of bogged down a little bit. We were near about the 45-yard line going towards the south end zone. We had a fourth and 4, and we were running a back out of the backfield play to try and get the ball to the running back in the flat and make the first down. And there was just under 2 minutes to go in the game, and they picked it up and they covered it. So Sandy scrambled a little bit. All of a sudden, he found Jimmy Smith open about the 10-yard line and threw a great ball like on a rope and hit Jimmy over, right down about the 10-yard line. And he got to the 5. And then the first play, Michael Parks ran an off tackle power down to the 1. And then we were able to see they were really looked like they were trying to take away Parks on the right side. So we ran a quarterback sneak back to the left, and Sandy scored. and we made the extra point, and that's how we won that game. And that went down right to the final minute. The next year, up in Naugatuck, Joey Potter was our quarterback, and on the first offensive series of the game, it might have been the first or second play, he went about 65 yards on an option for a touchdown, and um, then we were then Naugatuck scored, and I believe we were tied, and then Joey Potter brought us down the field, but you could tell he was hurting, and we weren't. And he was so courageous. You could tell he just refused to give in to the hurt, and he got us to the end zone, even threw a couple of wounded ducks for him, and he was a great passer. We wondered what we were trying. What's the problem? He kept on shaking us off. Don't worry, I'm all right. As it turns out, he had sustained a broken collarbone. It was when they cut the pads off, it was about 2 inches below. The break was about 2 inches below the regular collarbone line. It was just incredible how the courage he played with. But then Naugatuck, we didn't make the extra point. Naugatuck came down and scored, and we were behind at halftime, 14-13. And Joey Shea was a sophomore, had not really played at all in a big game yet. He was a nice young quarterback, but all of a sudden you're playing on Thanksgiving between 6,000-7,000 people in Naugatuck, and we're undefeated, and the season's on the line, and we sort of bogged down a little bit in the third quarter and the fourth quarter, and we got the ball back in the fourth quarter with about 6 minutes to go, and Timmy McNamara was a junior receiver and a real fine all-around athlete, and we figured he could run the option a little bit. He had been a backup freshman quarterback, and I don't believe he ever took a snap in a game because he played a lot as a sophomore, and he certainly was playing all the time as a junior, and so I don't think he ever took a snap in the game, but he came in and he ran the option, a couple crazy plays. He dives people and whatever, but he used his athletic skills. We drove down. We got to about the 5 yard line, and then Billy McAllister caught a great block from Dave Gracken, Joe DiVincenzo, and barreled into the end zone, and we scored and made the 2 points. And then Naugatuck started to drive, and they went for it on about a 4th and 1 from midfield, and they had made 2 first downs in a row, and they thought they were getting the momentum, but about 2 minutes to go, and Ray Roberts, who unfortunately is deceased, who was a real tough linebacker for us, played with all kinds of pain and injuries, but he hit Terry Palmer, the quarterback, and stood him up for no gain, and we held on to win. So both games went down to the last 20, 30 seconds, and we were fortunate enough to come out victoriously.
And I think, Coach, when you win games like that, you appreciate it more because when you blow a team out, I mean, it's fun and you don't have to stress as much. But, at the same time, how hard it is when it goes down to the wire. So when you win games like that, you probably appreciate those games more than the blowouts.
We did. We definitely appreciated the win. We were younger then too. We were very good at celebrating, and we were very, very happy.
Right. Now, another game, man, it was a tough day for both Derby and Ansonia. I think it was on a Saturday because uh, it had rained on Thanksgiving. But 1985, you lose a heartbreaker 33-27. But what a game it was. I mean, it went back and forth between both teams. And it was just a classic Naugatuck Ansonia Thanksgiving Day game. So talk about that game a little bit.
Well, that's another day that, unfortunately for us, but even though Derby lost to Shelton that day, and that was the year we lost to Derby 7-6, and we had beaten Shelton earlier in the season. Uh, when we lost on Thanksgiving Day, we didn't get into the playoff because had we won, we would have. Once Derby lost, we would have gone to the playoff. But in any event, went back. We weren't a very strong running team that year. We had probably the two best receivers in the state, and Terry McNamara, who was the player of the year in the state, who caught 88 passes and had 18 touchdowns, and Pat Ahern, who caught 55 passes and had 17 touchdowns. And in this day and time, people have the spread offense and they're throwing the ball over the place. We were still two wide outs, but tight end and two running backs, and and we still tried to run the ball. We ran plenty of wishbone also. And Jeff Capola was our quarterback. He was a senior quarterback, and he was an all-state quarterback. So we were we were very we were very proficient for the most part in throwing the ball. But in that game, we were ahead. As a matter of fact, Terry ran a kickoff back for a touchdown, I believe, and we went ahead. Naugatuck ran the ball against us that day better than any Naugatuck team ever had. They did a great job of running the fullback traps and caused us some problems. The game went back and forth right to the end. We had a chance at the end. There was an unfortunate call which came back to hurt us, but those things happen at times, and we lost by less than a touchdown, and we were instead of being in the playoffs, we were watching Derby play. So that happens sometimes. Thankfully, it doesn't happen too many times, but when it does happen, it certainly hurts.
Right. Coach, I think in 1989, what a great Ansonia team that was. And you guys basically dominated every team you played that year and really weren't tested till Thanksgiving. And again, another rain out. I think this was on a Sunday afternoon up in Naugatuck. And it was a real battle. And you guys came out victorious 14-7. But that game proved to me what kind of team that 89 Ansonia team was, because when they faced adversity, they somehow, were able to, they might have bent a little bit, but they didn't break. And that game is proof of that, because that was a hard fought victory and it just typified that 89 team.
Well, what made that weekend even more special is that we were chasing Stratford for the number one rating in the state. We had been number two for mostly the whole year. Stratford was number one, and all the Thanksgiving Day games were postponed. Some were Friday. They were scheduled for Friday. They were postponed again. Naugatuck's field was so bad that they postponed it till Sunday. But we went and saw Stratford play Bunnell on Saturday, and Bunnell upset Stratford in a great high school game. And their rivalry's been going on for at least 50 years, I guess, maybe more. And we were there for it. So that gave us the opportunity that if we could beat Naugatuck and then win the state championship, we would most likely end up number one in the state. And we went to Naugatuck and we were playing well, moving the ball, but we just couldn't score. And Naugatuck went ahead 7-0, and we were again, we'd make 3 or 4 first downs, then get bogged down. Finally, we hit Duncan Della Volpe for a touchdown pass. He was our tight end then, and we went. And that was Keith Pelotowski was our quarterback, and we went in tied, and then you tied the game up at 7-7, and then we sort of dominated most of the whole second half, and finally Kevin was just an outstanding back that year, and he may have carried the ball maybe the last 10 plays. He probably carried it 7 or 8. I'm just guessing if I remember. But he finally scored, and we went ahead 14-7, and we held on. Naugatuck battled us the whole way. Again, one of those white knucklers that when you're with 2 minutes to go in the game, if it's anybody's game. Plus, if they scored, we were either going to go into overtime or they would have played for 2 to win the game in regulation. But we didn't have to see what was going to happen because we stopped them, and then we were happy to go home and get ready for. In those days, you're just still playing the one playoff game. So the nice thing about that was, even though we played on Sunday, we didn't have to play again till the following Saturday. So we had ample time to prepare for the opponent in the playoff game. But that went right down to the last seconds of the game. And there were quite a lot of those for a long time there.
And what's interesting about that game too, Coach, if I remember, and I'm pretty sure I'm almost 99% positive on this, it was also the day Ansonia inducted athletes into the Hall of Fame. They had their banquet that day. I think they might have had it later that evening. So, I mean, there was so much going on. I mean, Pop Shortle, who never misses an Ansonia game, he ran the Hall of Fame back then. So, I mean, the weather just kind of put a wrench in everything. So, I mean, had Ansonia lost, it would have kind of put a little damper on that Hall of Fame ceremony. So it kind of worked out for everybody the entire day.
Well, we know one thing, that it worked out on the football side, thankfully, or else it would have been one long winter.
Yeah, that's for sure. So, Coach, Another game that really stands out to me as far as Ansonia and Naugatuck go, and another great game that sometimes doesn't get mentioned a lot because uh, the previous game was such a classic as well. But 1995, you guys win a very emotional 7-0 game. I think Mark Barnabucci scored in that game late in the game, maybe, and it was a very hard fought victory. And again, Ansonia, nobody expected Naugatuck to give Ansonia a battle that day, but Naugatuck came ready to play. But that's what winning teams do. And that team of, Stephen Coughlin, Jimmy Froelich, Jeff Gregorio, Jason Lightham, Tavius Winder, guys like that, they all stepped up when they had to. And again, they bent a little bit, but they didn't break. And the 95 game was proof of that as well.
Right now, that was the game that it was again. We had an excellent defensive team that year. They played extremely well on defense, and but now that's the game that Stephen Coughlin caught about a 60-yard touchdown pass. He was a wide receiver, came in motion towards the middle of the field, and then turned right upfield, and Luke Richmond hit him with about a quick semi slant, but he outran the secondary for the only touchdown at the time, and Naugatuck was stopped a number of times on defense, but the key to our defense and was when Jay Zabina, who was hurt, wasn't, and he had made the great play at the end of the game the year before against Joey Edmonds on fourth down on the famous tie game and the overtime game in '94, and he wasn't sure if he could play or not, but then he had his equipment with him, so he dressed at halftime. He came out and played so well on defense in the second half that he was the player of the game, and he didn't even dress for the first half of the game. So that was a game where an individual player showed what it took to be willing to give of himself for the team. Um, had he wasn't going to hurt, he wasn't going to re-aggravate the injury, but he would have had to play with the pain, and it was a question of whether he could. Well, he showed that he could, and um, it spurred us on to a 7-0 victory. And then Mike Bernabucci scored the only touchdown the next week against Bloomfield when we won by 7-0 again. So we had that 75 team played excellent defense the whole year long, and we were very fortunate to have the people that we had there.
Right. Another game, coach, that I really enjoyed, and it doesn't get mentioned a lot, but it was a great game between two teams, was in 2001 up at Naugatuck. And I think Naugatuck won that game 14-13. But again, it looked like, Naugie was going to, at least in my opinion, run away with this game. And typical Ansonia, they get right back in it. And honestly, coach, I think there was a penalty on a touchdown and you guys had to get pushed back 15 yards. And I really think in a lot of ways that affected the outcome. And if you guys don't get that penalty, hey, we might be talking about you guys winning maybe 15-14 or at least going to overtime again.
Right. What happened was there was a fumble, and the player who picked it up ran to the end zone. And he was a little too exuberant. Just did a flip. He flipped over, and when someone does scores like that on Thanksgiving, it's such a great thing. I mean, what he did had no effect on the outcome of the game. He was already in the end zone, and um, maybe it's just sour grapes to me thinking that, it shouldn't have been called. You look back on things, you always have a jaundiced viewpoint perhaps. But in any event, we scored in the penalty. We instead of going for the extra point from the 3-yard line, we were going from the 18-yard line. Obviously, the odds on scoring from there are very high against you. And so we were behind. Well, I'm sorry, we were still ahead though. We went ahead 13-7, and then Naugatuck came down in the last quarter and scored. And instead of and, or no, and I'm sorry, it was 13-12.
Right.
It was 13-6. They hadn't made the extra point, and they scored to make it 13-12. And they went for two, and they ran an off tackle play, and they were able just to squeak in for the extra point, and we ended up losing 14-13. It was a very very difficult loss on for Thanksgiving. I can tell you that.
Right. Coach, another game, and again, it seemed like you guys were pretty much in control, but this team needed to win this game because they did not have a win against Naugatuck in their career, and they were one of the best Ansonia teams ever. They were fighting to be the first Ansonia team to finish number one, and that was, of course, the '83 team. I believe they won 28-12. So, although it may not have been what you call a classic, it was very important because those kids had not beat Naugatuck in their careers.
They had it. I mean, I think it won the first two. They won 24-21 in 2000 in 1981, and then they won 7-6 in
82.
in
Yeah.
'82. And it's funny, this game, the first play was almost the exact same thing that happened in '79. Jeff Capola was a sophomore quarterback there. He ran the option. He ran the same side that Joey Potter ran it, and he ran it for a touchdown. And we I don't believe we were ever behind in this game. We might have been tied once, but we went ahead 14-7. Then Earl Stanley intercepted a pass. I don't remember if he scored on it or just he brought it right down to where we would score from, and inside the 10-yard line. And that sort of clinched things for us. And that was an extremely emotional game. And I remember Coach McAllister, all the at the end of the year, the team would always chip in for presents for the coaches, and he got a present. He present was it was nice to the team, of course, but he said to the team, look, the only thing he wants for a present that year was a piece of paper with the score of this game on it with a win. Uh, so when that game was over, somebody found somebody found a piece of cardboard, I believe, got a magic marker or something, and wrote the score on the paper and gave it to him right there at the field and said, "There's your present, coach." And and that meant a lot, an awful lot at that time.
Right. And again, like I said, a lot was riding on that game, and those kids wanted to be the first team to finish number one, and they were able to do so, and they weren't going to be denied. Coach, you alluded to this earlier. You touched on it a little bit, but the final game I wanted to talk about, because in my opinion, and again, I haven't seen a lot of the Ansonia Naugatuck rivalry because being from Derby, I see Derby and Shelton more, but just watching this game on Valley Cable, I could still watch it to this day. And that, of course, is the 1994 28-21 overtime win that you guys got. And I'll be honest with you, Coach, I really, you kind of look at it as like, you don't want to compare baseball to football, but I look at it as if these two teams had a 7-game series, it was probably going 7. That's how evenly matched these two teams were. And it was just a classic football game. It sometimes the papers will hype up a game and it doesn't live up to that. But this game lived up to everything. And, Jack Hunt said it best after the game. He said, I don't know who we're going to play next week, but I'm just glad we don't have to play Naugatuck again because that's how hard of a game it was for both teams.
Well, it started with the year before when Naugatuck beat us up there. Jack had never lost to Naugatuck in his first 6 years, and they beat us with a team that became the Double L state champions, and and we went 9-1 and didn't go to the playoffs. So there was a real taste in our mouth all winter long, and a vow that we would somehow win next year, because we had to win to get to the playoffs the next year. And it was a back and forth game. Um, they had a great quarterback in Arthur Dent. I mean, in Joey Edmonds. Um, we had we had so many outstanding players, but we had people like Stephen Clark and Phil Mrazek, who were Division I college players. We had Ronald Tate, who was a great runner. Peter Reynolds. We had Luke Richmond. I mean, you can go on and on. Vinny Lindsley, David Sisto was an all-state
Yeah.
lineman, and I don't Joe Chachowski, and there's just so many of them. Jeff Gregorio on defense, Alonzo Tate. I mean, if I've named 10, I can name 20, because we played a lot of almost one way for the most part of the year. Although a big game like that, Steven played every play, Mrazek played every play, Sisto played every play, and it went back and forth, and we were sort of we were behind at halftime, 7-6, and we came and halftime seemed like it took forever. The Naugatuck band was out there playing. We were waiting to go. We must have jumped off that table 10 times to come out. We just had to get back on the field. And we got back on and we went down and we ran a deep bootleg that Steven was playing quarterback then. And he hit Mrazek, I believe, for a touchdown. And we went ahead 14 and we made the extra point. We went ahead uh we went ahead 14 to let's see. I
14,
know
7. Yeah.
14-7, and then we went, but then we scored again. I know one thing. We were up 8 points going into the end. Going in, we had the ball. We had the ball, trying to run the clock out, and we were up 8 points.
I think it was 21.
And it was 21. It was 21-13. That's right, because we
13,
scored
yeah.
again. Then they scored, and that's right. It was 21-13 at the time, and we had the ball with about 2 minutes to go, and if we made one more first down, the game was over. And on fourth down, we ran an option from like their 40-yard line. We didn't want to take a chance of getting a punt block, and they stopped it. And on the first play, they ran a crisscross handoff, which we were prepared for, and we were well prepared for in the double wing. But Edmonds had drifted out to the sideline, and as they ran the crisscross, the left halfback coming and got the ball. The left halfback gave the ball to the right halfback coming back towards the Naugatuck bench. All of a sudden he stopped and he threw the ball out to Edmonds. And Edmonds took off down the sidelines. He could fly. And I remember Steven was chasing him and almost got him, but Steven just didn't have the angle to get him. It was no one's fault because he just drifted out there and he was away from the field, away from where the play was going on. So they scored, but they were still down 2. Um, then they had an excellent fullback named Conklin. They ran a middle trap, which they ran it to perfection, and they got and they hit the extra point, and all of a sudden we were tied, and then we got the ball for like 3 plays, and they were just killing us. I mean, momentum had clearly swung. Then we went out for the coin toss, and they won the toss and elected to go uh,
On defense. Yeah.
on defense. And our offense coordinator, Jim Delavolpe, had done some work on an unbalanced line and decided to use it in the overtime, and it worked out very well. We gave the ball to Ronald Tate twice, I believe, if not 3 times. But he went in and he went off a right tackle and scored, and we went ahead. We went ahead by a
20,
touchdown
yeah, 28.
and 28-21, and then they had 4 chances to tie the game. And I know that if they scored, they were going for 2 to win it right then. They weren't going to kick to play another overtime period. And one thing that did surprise us, they never gave the ball back to the fullback again, who just ripped through us on that goal line play. And they ran into the short side, which helped us one time. Make a long story short, they were on the short side was the Naugatuck side, and they ran bootleg into the Naugatuck side on fourth down, and that's where Zabina was, and he crashed through, and his Edmonds was trying to throw a ball into the end zone. He had a receiver, but the receiver was being covered by Steve, and I don't think if he even got the ball off, I don't think he would have completed it. But we didn't have to worry about it because the ball went flying out of bounds because Zabina just manhandled him and he went to the ground. And it was certainly one of the greatest wins in Ansonia history of any game at any time of the year. It was the biggest crowd I've ever seen there for all the years I've coached, 50-something years, and it was a joyous celebration.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the classic games. It really was. And I mean, that's what that rivalry is, coach. And like I said, it's, sure, when you're coaching, when you're playing, of course you want to win and you want to win by a lot. And you don't want it to be where it goes back and forth. But for the casual football fan that goes to see these two teams play, I know that person enjoys it when both teams are evenly matched and it's a great contest. And to me, with Derby and Shelton no longer playing, and of course, uh, rivalries have died down in Thanksgiving now. There's not the same rivalries anymore. This rivalry is still going on. So I would say, this is just my opinion, and I'm always going to be partial to the Valley. I would say this is the best Thanksgiving rivalry in the state. And I'm sure there might be some that disagree, and that's okay. But I really think that these two teams have a wonderful rivalry.
Mike, it's funny because I grew up in Derby, as you know, and I played whatever sports I could play there. And they didn't have pop order football then, unfortunately. But I went to Derby games starting in 1956. My aunt was a teacher at the high school, so I'd go to as many games as I could. But that's when I started going to Thanksgiving Day games, and uh, and then when I went to Notre Dame, I didn't obviously I couldn't go to them anymore. But I mean, the first game I went to Derby got whacked pretty good in '56 over in Shelton, but the next year in Derby was 1957, and to this day I still remember that game. I was 10 years old. Derby beat Shelton. Guy, a kid named Joe Lavergne went in and played quarterback for most of the time in the second half, and he was tremendous. And on that, the Derby crowd was. I thought it was almost at Yankee Stadium. It was so loud and everything, and that was my first real involvement in Thanksgiving Day football, and it's even grown way since then. But and to see how when Derby won that game, it meant just so much to the town, and they hadn't beaten Shelton maybe in, I'm just guessing, 7 8 years at that time, and that was a special game. And so I can imagine how the Ansonia fans have felt for the 50 something years that I've been involved in, because I know what these games have meant to me. Uh, the wins, the losses are something that just kills you as a coach, kills the players, and it really kills the coaching staff. But it's changed so much now because most of the time we're going to the playoffs and you have to put it behind you and get ready for the playoffs. I remember when we lost though in '85, we were 9-2 for the year. When we lost in '93, we were 9-1, and not to be going into the playoffs, you just to have that Naugatuck loss, and that's how the season ended. Was just was just something that really would wreck the whole year. So Thanksgiving football certainly means an awful lot to the Ansonia football team.
Yeah, it really does. And again, I mean, it's hard to believe, but now, another Thanksgiving game is coming up. You guys will head to Naugatuck on Thursday. And coach, ironically, I don't think you've lost at Naugatuck since 2001. So you're talking about 23 years now. Again, granted, you play some games at Nolan Field. I know that, but Naugatuck, like the last few Naugatuck wins have actually been at Ansonia. You guys have not lost at Naugatuck in a very long time.
Well, Mike, we hope you're saying the same exact. We hope you're saying the same thing. Thanksgiving afternoon about 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock, whatever. That we still haven't lost to Naugatuck in a long time.
Yeah.
Um, I remember when we did lose there in 2000 in '81. It was an interesting ride back to Ansonia with all the Naugatuck crowd on the street on Rubber Avenue, and the some of the cafes there were very boisterous. And when they found that our bus was coming down the street, they couldn't have been happier. But let's just hope that we have a very victorious ride home.
Right. Well, coach, I wish you nothing but the best. I wish you guys good luck. And, it's always good when you're still, on the sidelines coaching. You and Bobby Lisi, I feel like have been there forever. And we need people like you in high school football. So just keep up the great work and best of luck Thursday. And we'll do this again in a couple weeks.
Mike, thank you. We're the lucky guys, and hopefully it'll continue.
Thank you, coach. And of
Have a
course,
happy Thanksgiving, Mike.
you as well, coach. And of course, that's the one and only John Sponheimer. For Mike Kenichi, this is Spooney Scrapbook saying good night, everyone. Okay.